Good morning and welcome to the Collaborative on Health and the Environment Alaska Teleconference on Upholding Our Human Right to Live in a Healthy Environment with guest presenters Monique Harden and Vi Wahi. My name is Diana DeFazio and I'll be facilitating today's call on behalf of Alaska Community Action on Toxics, or ACAT. CHE Alaska is a regional partnership group of the National Collaborative on Health and the Environment. CHE Alaska aims to advance knowledge and effective action to address growing concerns about the links between human health and environmental factors. You can find more information on the websites www.healthandenvironment.org and www.akaction.org. And today's call will last 1 hour. Except for the speakers, all participants are muted during the presentations. Today our presenters will be talking about how Indigenous peoples, people of color, and poor communities are disproportionately subjected to toxic pollution, and how our government facilitates and perpetuates such environmental injustice. They will also discuss how communities have successfully organized to defend their right to a healthy environment, and how groups such as Advocates for Environmental Human Rights and Alaska Community Action on Toxics work with communities to defend the right to clean air, clean water, and toxic-free food. Today we have the honor of being joined by attorney and environmental justice leader Monique Harden. Since 1996, Ms. Harden has provided legal counsel and advocacy support that have helped community organizations win important environmental justice victories. In 2003, Ms. Harden, along with Natalie Walker, co-founded Advocates for Environmental Human Rights, based in New Orleans. Ms. Harden is a graduate of the University of Texas School of Law and received a Bachelor of Arts from St. John's College. Ms. Harden has authored and co-authored numerous reports and papers on environmental justice and human rights issues. Her advocacy work has been featured in television, radio, and print news, as well as books, magazines, and documentaries. And she's in Alaska for the entire week, offering many events, and we'll give you some details about that towards the end of the call. We'd like to welcome you, Monique.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And you can go ahead and begin when you're ready.
Sure. Okay. Well, let me just begin by giving a little bit of background about Advocates for Environmental Human Rights, or which I'll refer to as AEHR. Natalie Walker and I founded AEHR because we wanted to advocate for human rights remedies for what are essentially human rights violations taking place in people of color and poor communities all across the United States. Communities and people who are harmed by polluting and extractive industries. The fact that these types of industries are permitted by environmental laws, permitted to operate with little or no regard for human health and environmental sustainability for future generations, compelled us to look beyond environmental laws for legal solutions. I cannot emphasize enough that our government has an obligation to protect human rights. These obligations are enshrined in human rights treaties such as the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. The ratification of these and other treaties are, pursuant to Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, part of our American system of law. Our mission at AEHR to uphold our human right to live in a healthy environment concentrates on what is at the heart of the environmental justice movement, which is articulated in Principle 10 of the Principles of Environmental Justice. The Principle 10 recognizes that environmental injustice is a violation of basic human rights. This guides our work at AEHR in providing legal services and how we support community organizing and how we campaign to educate and mobilize members of the public to demand human rights protections from toxic exposures and industrial hazards that make communities unlivable and ultimately displaces people from the places they call home. In March 2005, AEHR filed a human rights complaint on behalf of residents of Mossville, Louisiana, and Mossville Environmental Action Now Incorporated. Mossville is located in the southwest part of the state of Louisiana near the Texas border. And in this community, which was founded by emancipated African Americans who emancipated themselves from slavery before the Civil War, you will now find 14 toxic industrial facilities in a place that was home to hundreds of African Americans, and it was a very rich, biodiverse environment. There are bayous and water streams, very rich soil that people were able to cultivate into farmland, as well as plentiful seafood from these waterways. And so as a rural community, Mossville was able to thrive because of the environment where they made their home. That is no longer the case because of the permitting that is allowed an oil refinery owned and operated by ConocoPhillips, a coal-fired power plant owned and operated by Entergy, the largest cluster of vinyl manufacturers in the United States, that includes PPG Industries in Georgia Gulf, among others, as well as a number of specialty chemical manufacturers in the community that have made the water so toxic that it's not even safe for a boat ride, let alone fishing or swimming, or baptisms, as Mossville residents were able to conduct for as part of their religion faith. The monitoring tests and evaluations by the Environmental Protection Agency show that cancer-causing chemicals are in concentrations at 100 times above the ambient health standards in Mossville, and there's contamination in the soil and in the bodies of Mossville residents who have dioxin concentrations that are 3 times above what scientists would expect to find among members of a population in an industrialized country. In addition to that high level of dioxins, it's also a unique grouping of dioxin compounds. We have been successful in identifying facilities in the Mossville community that have report their various releases of dioxin chemical compounds that are linked with the dioxins detected in the blood of Mossville residents. I should mention that the dioxin testing was conducted by the U.S. Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, which soon after the test results began a PR campaign to mislead the public about the dioxin crisis in the Mossville community. We filed this human rights complaint on behalf of Mossville residents under claiming that several rights protected by the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man have been violated by the U.S. environmental regulatory system. These rights include the human right to life, to health, to racial equality, and to privacy as it relates to the security of one's home. Much of the work involved in filing this complaint required that Natalie and I both, unlearn what we were taught in law school and how we practice environmental litigation. And I just want to say a few thoughts on that. In previous environmental justice struggles where we were able to work with communities, namely in Louisiana and Mississippi, the kind of litigation that we undertook was really bringing both environmental justice demands into a very formal legal complaint of violation of an existing environmental law. And so the success was really hinged on errors made by the state regulatory agency and or the company applicant for the permit that were did not comply with existing environmental law and regulations, whether it's under the National Environmental Policy Act or the Clean Air Act or Clean Water Act. That is not unique to she and I, but it's also the way in which all environmental legal practitioners go about challenging a permit. You're looking for errors made. What you do not complain about is that, the environmental law itself should not allow a toxic or otherwise hazardous industrial facility to operate in a way that it would harm human health, especially for nearby residents. That is not a term or provision in any environmental law. And so demystifying the environmental regulatory system is extremely important. And so, the thing to keep in mind is, well, what does it take for an industrial facility that, releases all kinds of cancer-causing chemicals as part of its operations? What does it take to get a permit? Well, to construct and the facility and operate the facility. Well, you can look at Section 7412 of the Clean Air Act for your answer. And what it requires is compliance with an emission standard promulgated by the EPA. The emission standards are based on what the administrator gleans from surveys of similar companies operating within the same industrial sector and deriving the emission standard from what 12% of that industrial sector is able to achieve in terms of less pollution. So what we have essentially with our environmental laws is a legal codification of the status quo of industrial operations. It doesn't, it provides little or no regard for human health, human life, and environmental sustainability. When you look at, when you go beyond environmental law and you look at the obligations of our government to protect human rights, there you find, legal solutions. The U.S. government has, under the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man, for example, it has the obligation to protect the human rights to life, health, freedom from racial discrimination or racial equality, and privacy as relates to the security of the home, as well as numerous other enumerated rights within this law. We filed this complaint with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which has the function of a judiciary for the Organization of American States. This body, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, is the body that receives petitions filed by a person in any of the member countries of the Organization of American States system, and then works to investigate the allegations in the petition and then ultimately render a judicial decision on the petition and briefs filed by the relevant government. The commission is extremely important in terms of looking at the precedent and the decisions that it has established connecting human rights law to environmental protection. And in one of its decisions, which was a country report, it recognized that a government's that the non-existence of an environmental regulation or the inadequacy of that standard or the lax enforcement of that standard can translate into violations of human rights. And so there are a number of cases in which the Commission has required of member countries a cessation of hazardous operations, healthcare services for people who've been harmed or threatened with harm from those operations, as well as changes within that country so that people have a way to participate and to file claims and seek relief for the harms that they experience as a result of governmental authorizations. In the Mossville human rights petition that we filed, we seek two sets of remedies. The first set focuses on the specific needs of Mossville residents who we have been working with since 1996. And those are in the specific action for a voluntary relocation for consenting residents, because some residents in Mossville do want to have the resources to move to healthier environs elsewhere. Cleaning up of contaminated areas in the community, healthcare services for all residents. The second set of, I should mention it within the first set, is a permit moratorium so that there's no pollution increases in this community. The second set of remedies focus on the systemic flaws of the U.S. environmental regulatory system so that it would be compelling the government to look at certain changes of this so-called system of environmental protection. Those focus on ensuring safe distances between residential communities and regulated pollution sources, safeguards to prevent the cumulative, multiple, and synergistic impacts of toxic exposures, requirements for safer alternatives in manufacturing, disposal and transportation and storage, as well as prohibition and remedies for cases of environmental racism. Within the Mossville petition, what we focused on was the background and history of Mossville, as well as the system of governance that has made it a toxic hotspot. So we go into explaining to the Commission the effect of industrial tax incentives that are state and federal. We go into the way in which the environmental regulatory system works to authorize and allow toxic industrial operations with little or no regard for human health and environmental sustainability, that it's really focused on this, creating an even playing field among industrial sectors based on the devices and equipment in use by a fraction of companies within an industrial sector. We also focus on the growth of environmental human rights law within the Commission and the inter-American system, as well as in other human rights systems in countries around the world. It's really interesting when you begin to explore what other judiciaries and legislative bodies have done to ensure human rights protections from environmental threats or harms from industrial operations. There's legislation such as the Seveso II directive that requires a safe distance. It's enacted by the European Union. There's legislation that requires the testing of all manufactured chemicals to ensure safety as a way to protect human health by the same body. There are judicial decisions in Asian countries, African countries, South American countries, European countries that protect residential communities from industrial harms through a variety of laws that have the same focus on human rights protections that our government also has the obligation to uphold. And so we focus on how the U.S. government's environmental regulatory system violates the human right to life, applying this applying environmental human rights law that has been rendered by judiciaries as well as enacted by legislative bodies, how the environmental regulatory system violates the right to health, how it violates the right to racial equality or freedom from racial discrimination, and how it violates the right to privacy as it relates to the security of one's home. In March 2010, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, after reviewing the petition that we filed on behalf of Mossville residents, as well as the briefs presented by the U.S. government, which at that time was the Bush administration, it determined that the petition that we filed was admissible for a judicial review on the merits, which meant that the Commission took jurisdiction over the Mossville case. This is a historic decision because it's the first time that an international human rights judicial body has taken jurisdiction over a case of environmental racism in the United States. Since that ruling, the Obama administration has filed, at this point, 2 briefs challenging the admissibility ruling by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Their challenges essentially say that Mossville residents have a legal remedy somehow or another within the United States for their grievances. The Commission's admissibility ruling acknowledges, and I think quite correctly, that there is no such opportunity in the United States to seek a legal remedy in U.S. courts or administrative bodies or some other kind of tribunal within this country. In fact, in reaction to the admissibility ruling, EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson agreed with it, recognizing that there is no law in the United States or set of laws in the United States that Mossville residents can invoke to protect their rights to health and racial equality. And so, where we are right now is looking forward to a hearing before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, where basically the environmental regulatory system will be put on trial. This is, I think, a key and critical moment for interested environmental justice advocacy groups to get involved in the Mossville human rights case. There's opportunities for filing amicus briefs to the Commission, for underscoring that that what is going on in Mossville is not any different than what's going on here in communities in Alaska or communities in any other state in this country. And I think this can create a groundswell of focusing local work to human rights advocacy in order to strengthen not only the way in which we go about protecting the environment in this country, but also galvanizing people to expect of their government the basic minimal protection of human rights. I'm still startled by the fact that we, as a whole, look at human rights as though it's the sun, moon, and stars of government, when it really is the floor of government and governance. And my, hope and prayer with the Mossville human rights case is that we can finally compel our government to protect the human rights that we all have, and those human rights include a healthy environment. I'll conclude my talk here, and I'm sure you guys have questions, and I want to leave space for that. But next we'll be hearing from Vahigi.
Thank you, Monique, very much. And remember, we do have discussion time at the end of the call. So thank you for your incredible work, and we look forward to hearing more during our discussion. Now I'd like to introduce Vi Wahi, Environmental Health and Justice Program Director for Alaska Community Action on Toxics. Vi is a bilingual Yupik Eskimo who was born in Savunga on St. Lawrence Island. Although her family moved to Nome, she grew up in both communities, traveling between Nome and the island throughout her childhood. In 2010, Vi was awarded the Environmental Achievement Award in recognition of valuable contributions to environmental excellence in Alaska by the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. She serves as a National Advisory Environmental Health Sciences Council member, which advises the director of the National Institute of Health. Vi is sought out repeatedly to speak at national and international meetings about the work of Alaska Community Action on Toxics. And Vi and her husband have 4 boys and live in Anchorage. Welcome, Vi. Would you like to begin?
Yes. Thank you, Diana. And I'd like to welcome Monique Harden. It's a pleasure to have her here with us on this collaborative on the health and environment call. As Diana mentioned, my name is Vi Wahi. My Yupik name is Bangunhak. I'm the daughter of the late John and Della Wahi. I'm from St. Lawrence Island. I was born and raised in Savunga. Our people on St. Lawrence Island have lived a traditional subsistence lifestyle, like a lot of our Native people here in Alaska, a lifestyle that we have lived for many, many generations, that our ancestors and forefathers have passed on to us. We have lived off the land and ocean. Our people on St. Lawrence Island are hunters, we're gatherers. We live off the land and ocean. We are getting ready to hunt for bowhead whale as we speak. Our communities are very busy getting prepared for our bowhead whale hunting. And I had the opportunity to go to Mossville last year, and it was a opportunity to meet the communities that have been impacted by the 14 chemical plant corporations that the communities of Moss live by. And it was very powerful to meet a community that has been greatly affected by the corporations that produce these toxic chemicals that are ending up in our environment, in our backyard. Even though we don't have manufacturers or plants, industries, we're finding them in our environment. They're ending up in the traditional foods like the bowhead whale, the walrus, the seals that we live off of. We're basically being contaminated without our consent by these corporations that are driven by power, by money, basically, and it's threatening our basic human rights to a way of life, our health and well-being, our environment, and a way of life. Our cultural rights are being violated by corporations and industries. We are being disproportionately affected by these toxic chemicals called persistent organic pollutants that are ending up in the Arctic. They come here through air and ocean currents. It's from lower 48 in other countries. It's like a grasshopper effect, and we are some of the most highly contaminated population on the planet, those of us that live off the land and ocean. We also have 2 formerly used defense sites on our island. Because of our proximity to Russia, the Air Force came and established 2 bases on our island, one at Gamble and the other at Northeast Cape. They came during the early 50s, and they occupied our island for about 20 years. And a former health aide, Annie Aloha, started noticing a lot of cancer in our people, especially those families that had lived at Northeast Cape, camped there, or worked there. And Annie tried to get help for our people for 20 years, and nobody would validate her concerns. She went from agency to agency to agency, and nobody would help her. And as a result of this military contamination, our Sivunga families that had lived at Northeast Cape, camped there or worked there, our people have 6 to 9 times higher PCB levels in the blood of our people. Our organization, Alaska Community Action on Toxics, have worked closely with the leadership and communities of Sivunga and Gamble since 2000 on a community-based participatory research project to address concerns from the military contamination, but also persistent organic pollutants, or POPs, the global contaminants that I mentioned. The burden of proof has been put on us. We have had to with the help of research team members from Alaska Community Action on Toxics and other research team members we collaborate with, we have had to do our own environmental and health research because our people have disproportionate health impacts from the military contamination from both in Gamble and at Northeast Cape. And it's been really hard trying to hold the military accountable. These two former Air Force bases have never been properly characterized. It's been really hard trying to hold the military accountable for an adequate cleanup. The biggest concern in Gamble is the drinking water source. Because of the environment in Gamble, it's cobble, and the military contamination is at Gamble, on top of the school, the playground, some of the homes and municipal buildings are on top of the waste site in Gamble, and the military contamination at Northeast Cape. We have massive fuel spills. As part of this community-based project, we've identified PCBs, pesticides, heavy metals, big concerns to our people because we're seeing health effects never seen before until after the military left. And as far as the global transport, as I mentioned, even though we don't have industries or manufacturers, we're finding them in our backyard, and a way of life that we have lived for many generations. When our people die off from the health effects seen from the military contamination and the persistent organic pollutants or POPs, it's affecting our way of life, our culture, and when our people die off, it's a violation of our way of life, our livelihood, and just to have our ability to have our children. It's affecting our mothers, our reproductive health of our mothers. It's affecting our children. These toxic chemicals affect learning disabilities. We have some of the most birth defects in the state, more so than white infants, and twice as much as infants in the lower 48. It has been a struggle. However, the military is not above the law, and also, we work on international level, national level, and state level for chemical policy reform. We have taken it upon ourselves to be keep on top of policy that is being worked on or looked at as we speak. Our leaders and community members have had to travel to Washington, D.C. to bring awareness and educate our legislators and meet with EPA, Department of Defense, State Department, Army Corps of Engineers officials to educate that what is happening to our people because of the military contamination and persistent organic pollutants. Our base, as I mentioned, it's been really hard. However, as part of a community-based project, we have come to learn about the military contamination and also POPs. We've had to take it upon ourselves so that we can protect the health and well-being of our people and future generations. And it's been a struggle. However, our people are united and working hard to change policy at the national, international, and state level so that our people and future generations are protected, and that the military contamination on our island is adequate so that our families that have been displaced from the military contamination at Northeast Cape have a right to get our land cleaned up to where that it is safe for our people to move back, and that there's no threat from the military contamination in Gamble from the PCBs, pesticides, heavy metals that is threatening the drinking water source. and it is an honor to speak with Monique Hardin. I am honored to sit here with her, and we at Alaska Community Action on Toxics, we believe that everyone has a right to clean air, clean water, and toxic-free food. Thank you.
Thank you, Vi. I would like to thank both Monique and Vi again for being with us today and for your unwavering commitment to environmental health and justice. I know that it's a struggle, as Vi mentioned, but you all are making a difference, and I know that many of the people on the line also work on behalf of environmental health and justice. And so at this time, we'd like to open the lines for questions and comments. So please wait a moment while we unmute the line.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please press *6 on your telephone to unmute your line, and please state your name and affiliation. We also ask that you try to be brief with your comments to allow others the opportunity to speak as well. So the lines are now open.
Hello, my name is Kim Lee Wong. I'm calling from Winnipeg, Canada. I'm with the Aboriginal Peoples Television Network. I guess my question is for Vi, and maybe if there's others on the line or have experience. One of the things in Canada about approaching this kind of topic may be similar in Alaska with the Indigenous people, is that because of the strong racism that exists, that a lot of times when you try to discuss birth defects or reproduction disorders, behavior issues or stuff as related to exposures to contaminants, a lot of times it's brushed off or not ignored because of the focus on lifestyle and looking at, and because most people believe many Indigenous people are drunks and don't eat properly and don't exercise, and that's the only problem. Therefore, there's no need to look any deeper. And I'm just wondering if maybe by, like, in your own work in Alaska, if you've been able to overcome that, or, like, how do you get studies done to try to kind of challenge that kind of thinking?
Well, thank you, Kim. You know, we have faced that racism also for, as you are well aware, for many generations. You know, our people are very are humble. We are, you know, we only take what we need from our environment. We are stewards of our lands. To live in a harsh environment in the Arctic, you have to be very well aware of your environment. When you have to go out hunting in a skin boat, you have to know the migration of the whales. You have to know when it's safe to go out hunting. We have over 300 words for ice alone. So, you know, we have, our people are our scientists, our people are our doctors, our teachers, and for Western culture, first of all, does not acknowledge our local and elder knowledge, a way of life that has been passed on for many generations. And the threat that has been imposed on us from Western culture, from the military, from industries, from corporations and manufacturers, when it threatens our existence, our culture, our traditions, we know that these threats to our way of life is not from the way that we have lived for many generations. It has been imposed from the military contamination, from the global transport of these toxic chemicals. And We are seeing, as I mentioned, birth defects twice as much as United States infants. We have more hospitalization rate. These cannot even be explained even when you take smoking and drinking into consideration. So a lot of these toxic chemicals, they affect our endocrine systems, they affect our reproductive health, diabetes, heart disease, and we are well aware of all the cancers that we're seeing. However, they're telling us, oh, as you mentioned, it's your way of life. However, this way of life has sustained us for many generations in a harsh climate, in an environment that we have thrived on for many generations. And for those that are not familiar with our way of life and our environment, for them to come to our communities and say that, you are nothing but drunks or you are lazy, that's why you're getting all these diabetes and heart disease, because you're not getting out like you're getting lazy, as you mentioned. 70 to 80% of our household eat just traditional foods. If you don't go out hunting, if you don't gather food or harvest food, you will not survive as a people. This is a way of life that is it's challenging in winter. It's very cold now up on St. Lawrence Island. A couple days ago, it was 55 below. I mean, when you have to live in this environment, you have to know your environment, and it's a way of life that our people have lived for many generations. And these toxic chemicals affect our well-being, so nobody is looking at how it might be affecting the ability of children to their learning they affect learning disabilities of children, they affect depression, they affect our endocrine systems, and to say otherwise is, as me being a mother and a grandmother and having no degree. However, I've challenged myself that, because, as I mentioned, it's been really hard trying to hold the military accountable. And how do you hold corporations that are miles and miles away? So I have taken it upon myself and communities like ours and leaders in our communities to learn as much as we can through this community-based research project, the toxic effects of these toxic chemicals from the military contamination and global transport, how they affect our bodies, and what we must do to hold the military accountable and work toward policy chemical reform.
Thank you, Vi, and Kim Lee, for your question. Would someone else like to ask a question or make a comment? Remember, just
I have a comment. I'm Dr. Roy Ozan.
Hi.
Medical doctor in my private practice, and I am so thankful to hear this approach that is described and this conversation, because in 40 years now of being a doctor and watching what's happening to our people, this is a worldwide phenomenon that the accumulated toxic load in all of us is exceeding the capacity to maintain life generation after generation. The illnesses and things that are piling up everywhere, of course it is worse on St. Lawrence Island and in the Mosul community, but it is an issue for all of us. And we really need, I think, an approach such as what you're talking about. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Roy.
This is Tom Kearns. I have a question for Monique.
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm the director of an organization called Environment and Human Rights Advisory, and it doesn't take a legal approach, very much in support of Monique's work and others who have taken legal approaches, but I look at it as a fundamentally moral issue. And so our organization prepares human rights assessment reports for environmental groups and government agencies and corporations. So my question for Monique is, a few days or a week or so ago, the United Nations Human Rights Council decided to create or appoint a new position, a person, an expert on human rights and the environment. And my question is how you think that will benefit your work, and or if you think it will benefit your work.
Well, I think it's definitely a positive development that is flows from what I was talking about earlier, which is this international and foreign development of human rights protections from environmental harms, unsustainable operations, and the destructive consequences of all that for our health and our environment and future. While with that post, that post has a lot of reinforcement given this movement towards environmental human rights that we're seeing taking shape around the world, and also nascently within the United States. The potential for a person in this position to have that that resource to go about investigating the compliance of governments that have human rights obligations, to investigating how they go about applying this to ensure a safe and healthy environment for all people is key. I think it's also an important opportunity for educating each and every one of us about what human rights obligations mean, not only from the legal standpoint of what governments are obligated to do, but what that means in terms of how we regard each other. Kim Lee's very important question about racism is central to that. Human rights violations, I believe, begin with disparaging a person's character and denigrating their culture and the places that they call home. And you've got all of that in the mix when you're talking about environmental racism and injustice.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. We have some more time for discussion, so if anyone would like to make a comment or ask a question, please press *6 on your telephone. Hello?
Good morning. Good morning. This is Carl Wasley calling from Anchorage, Alaska, Alaska's Big Village Network. I really appreciate the opportunity to ask a question to Monique, and I appreciate you sharing very important what the work you do. And Monique, I'm really interested in how we can get more collaboration or more organizations, individuals, or what is the process that we can get more people involved in the case that you discussed in your presentation?
Well, Carl, thanks for your question. Today is the first day. Pam and Vi and all the folks here at ACAT have been very visionary in bringing me up to this part of America, which I've never ever seen before, which is just amazing. I feel like I'm on another planet in so many ways when you compare it to what I'm used to in New Orleans, Louisiana. But this is part of a project that Advocates for Environmental Human Rights has developed, which we call the Environmental Justice, Health, and Human Rights Project, which involves providing, and this is taking place this week in Alaska, and I'll go into that just a little bit, but it involves providing skills training and capacity building for environmental justice advocates to begin understanding and applying human rights to their advocacy, and beginning with identifying the human rights violations going on in their communities, as well as working with members of the community to identify human rights-based solutions. The next steps, after which is more of a knowledge building and organizing phase of it, is then moving it into action. How do you begin using that understanding of what the violations are and what the solutions are from a human rights framework to begin petitioning government to implement those human rights-based solutions pursuant to human rights law? And so what we're doing at Advocates for Environmental Human Rights is providing that knowledge building as well as follow-up legal support to implement that knowledge into action and demand and advocacy. I'm not sure what this week involves, Carl, is a few days here in Anchorage. I'll be giving some lectures, working with the ACAT staff on a human rights training and advocacy strategies, and then we'll be going to places like Homer, St. Lawrence Island, where we'll workshops and gatherings with members of the Chicaloon tribe and the Savunga tribe as well. And so it's a week of bringing this information to folks and working around, well, what would be appropriate strategies that could not only express the desires of people for a healthy environment, but also pinpoint those responsible for it, and figuring out what are the human rights accountability strategies. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, where we filed the Mossville human rights case, is one mechanism that more people can get involved with. Others include the review that our government has to undergo to review compliance with ratified treaties. There's this, in that particular, which is before focused on treaty monitoring bodies within the United Nations. One interesting development that's come about since the UN Human Rights Council reviewed the U.S. government's compliance with all human rights standards, not just those that are enshrined in human rights treaties ratified by the government, but everything from the Universal Declaration to recognized human rights norms, which took place in November of 2010. There were 228 recommendations to the U.S. government on steps it should be taking to ensure human rights. It included environmental justice recommendations, as well as issues and recommendations focusing on criminal justice, housing, employment, education, health care, you name it. And last 2 Fridays ago, the Obama administration announced its human rights plan for implementing many of those recommendations. And I think one of the things that we can do is make that information available on the ACAT's website, perhaps, so that more people can access it. Because what the general plan involves is tapping various officials within the Obama administration to lead or coordinate work groups around specific human rights issue areas, to formulate a plan and work towards its implementation. For those of us who've been through similar processes before with government and may feel a little jaded, I think we should, be very optimistic in our approach, because this is the first time that a human rights plan has been, undertaken by our government, and trying to get as much as we can out of it, I think, is critical. So I hope we'll be able to see you while I'm here, Carl, this week.
Thank you, Monique, and we will make sure to put some information on our website so that people can get involved.
Okay.
Excellent idea. We probably have time for one more comment or question, and then I'll review Monique's schedule for the week. Okay. If there are no other comments or questions, I just want to remind everyone that Monique Harden is in Alaska all week long, giving so generously of her time. Tonight she will be speaking in Homer at the Islands and Ocean Visitor Center. and tomorrow night in Anchorage at the Wilda Marston Theater at the Lusac Library. And both of these events are free and open to the public, and they begin with a 6:30 p.m. reception, followed by the presentation at 7. And on Wednesday and Thursday, she'll be in Savunga on St. Lawrence Island. There are a number of other events as well, and I'm not sure which ones have reached capacity, but you can find out everything you need to know by calling the ACAT office at 907-222-7714 or checking the website at akaction.org. So I just want to thank everyone once again for joining us today, our presenters, as well as each of you out there doing your work in your communities. And to sort of echo what Dr. Ozanne said, that, just the way that we're all connected by the fact that we're impacted by global contaminants from the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of Alaska and beyond. There's so much that we all can do to support each other's efforts. So thank you once again so much for joining us today, and the call will be posted to our website probably within 24 hours if you joined late and would like to listen to the rest of it or share it with your friends and colleagues. So thank you, everyone.
I have one more question if there's a minute left.
Sure, go ahead.
About that last point that Monique made, who made the 228 recommendations, and where could we find them, and where can we find the Obama administration plan for implementing those?
Sure. Is this Carl again?
No, this is Tom Kearns.
Oh, Tom Kearns. Okay. Tom, you can find the 228. We have some information on our website, but it hasn't been updated with the latest human rights plan. Our website is ehumanrights.org. A little bit of background is that all member countries of the United Nations have to undergo what is called a universal periodic review, which is a review of a country's compliance with all human rights norms. The United States, for the first time, had to go to Geneva for this review in November 2010. The 228 recommendations were made during the session that the U.S. government was under this universal periodic review. They came from other member countries of the United Nations.
Okay.
They also came from advocacy by groups in the United States who made presentations to various members of the United Nations, as well as the UN Human Rights Council, on a number of human rights issues, problems that we have in the United States. So there's a shadow report by the U.S. Human Rights Network that's on their website. It's also on ours that chronicles a number of human rights violations and abuses occurring in the United States, and also shadow reports by other organizations and groups across the country. Soon, at the end of the session, the U.S. government, through Harold Koh, who's the legal advisor for the U.S. State Department, issued a response to the recommendations that was, for the most part, favorable to those recommendations, recognizing that many of the recommendations are aligned with the goal set by the President, and the job of the State Department is to figure out how to implement this across the federal government, but also state and local as well, with engagement and participation by members of the public. You can find more information about the Human Rights Plan. That includes the announcement of the plan, the document of the plan, and the contact information for each of the various designated federal officials leading up various human rights issues discussed in the plan at humanrights.gov, which is a part of the U.S. State Department's website.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Monique, I know you have to be off for one of the workshops soon, so we're going to end on time this morning. But again, I would like to thank everyone, all of the people that called in and our presenters, and have a wonderful day. And look for the call posted on our website by tomorrow. All right.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.